Someone who really has the most interesting bucket list, which we will get to eventually, is Per Wimmer, the Chief Executive Officer of Wimmer Financial. Good to have you with us, Per. Let's start, though, first of all, with what's happening in Syria. And more interestingly, I suppose, the United States' attitude towards Syria now. And the debate, obviously, that's been going on about chemical weapons, who's using them, when have they been used, where have they been used, but also how the United States now is perhaps trying to leverage some more evidence against President Assad.
Yeah, this is a real game changer now. The evidence of chemical weapons, it really lifts things up to a different level. And it almost reminds us about the old Cold War, because we're now having the big powers, Russia and America, talking to each other. And it's interesting because they are effectively fighting a little bit at different sides of the war, because Russia has been supporting Syria. They've got naval bases there. And America are now thinking about upping the game in terms of arming the rebels. So you effectively have both big boys fighting a war in Syria, potentially.
It's interesting that you've compared it to the Cold War, because we obviously have Secretary of State John Kerry going over to Russia today to speak to President Putin in Moscow. And it's still a case of treading quite a fine line diplomatically, isn't it?
Well, it is. I mean, diplomacy's got to have its ultimate chance before the Americans go ahead. But I think the Americans really think about it's sort of now they got to do something. This war's been going on for 3 years. 70,000 people are dead. And although no sort of major American interests are at stake, there's no doubt the Obama administration wants to finish this. And this is a really serious attempt to get to that. But the problem is the Russians have been blocking that so far, and China as well. But China seems to be following the Russian lead on this. So this is a very important meeting that'll be taking place in Russia. This is real.
And we'll keep an eye on it, that's for sure, on BBC World News. Well, let's look at today's front page of The Independent. They've highlighted an interview that they've had with the European Commissioner for Trade, Karel de Gucht, who has said all sorts of things, not least that he is amazed that a lot of British politicians know very little about Europe. Also, as well, saying British leaders should not indulge in a blame game with Brussels for the UK's economic and social problems. Fighting talk.
Yeah, there we are. I mean, I think, if anything, the article highlights really this dichotomy between what goes on in Brussels and what happens at Westminster. It's not that British politicians know less about Europe. It's just that it's so sensitive here in this country.
What's your perspective on the relationship between British politicians and Europe? Give us your angle on it. Interesting, as obviously you operate and work in the UK, but you're not originally from Britain, are you?
No, I'm from Denmark originally, and interesting enough, I used to work in the cabinet of the Vice President in the European Union, so I've got a pretty good insight from there, and I've lived in London for 14 years.
So what do you think? Do you think British politicians are out of touch, or what's your
No,
take
I just
on it?
think it's all about domestic politics. The European issue is so sensitive here in the UK, particularly the further you move to the right. We've seen it with UKIP, and certainly also in the Tory party has always been split about the issue of Europe, and that is it. It's all about domestic politics. Now, sitting in Brussels, it's very frustrating to see that there's all these great and good plans where they can save 3 to 4% on tariffs if they do one big trade agreement with America. So I can see why it's frustrating that they're sitting there seeing all these great benefits. But you can't forget domestic politics. It's what drives it.
The row continues, of course, as the ex-Chancellor Lawson has written in another newspaper in the UK, saying that the UK should be out sooner rather than later of Europe. I remember, Sally, when you were talking about Windows 8, and
the launch.
Was the great
it was not that long
big
ago.
thing, wasn't it, for Microsoft?
Well, it was hoped to be.
It was, well, yeah,
that was
it was
the
hoped
hope
to be. And now the Financial Times is comparing it to the new Coke fiasco. Do you remember when Coke brought out a new Coke and it just completely flopped? And it looks like this has happened with Microsoft. Are you surprised?
I'm not so surprised. It has been interesting to watch sort of Microsoft. They have gone. They used to be sort of fairly the cool brand, but they have gotten a lot sort of older and more complicated each time. The business model was, we're going to upgrade Windows, we're going to make it better and bigger and whatever. But we now reached a point where it's just too complicated, and you need to take a PhD in.
I think the Windows 8 model, though, is sort of all about a touch screen, isn't it?
Yeah.
Moving things around. So it's a big move for Microsoft. But many are saying people are just confused. They're confused by it.
And that's a problem. I mean, this should be easier. Software is supposed to make your life easier, not more complicated. And by having a high barrier to entry in form of you have to read manuals and really understand it, it's
well,
a big
the
problem.
FT is saying Microsoft's preparing for a U-turn, so we shall see if they're right on Windows 8. We'll keep an eye on that one.
Let's talk about the relationship between China and the UK, and also how diplomatic relations are actually risking Chinese investment. This is the angle that the Daily Telegraph has picked up on.
Yeah, this was the meeting with Cameron and the Dalai Lama. It turned out to be a very expensive meeting in retrospect, about 8 billion sterling potentially worth
in lost investment
from China. And on some key projects, actually. We're talking about the big rail system. And also we're talking about the big nuclear investments, which is obviously very key because this is the future of energy here in this country. So there's a lot of risk here, but clearly the Dalai Lama is very sensitive on the whole Tibetan issue.
Chinese investment in the UK hit an all-time high last year, some £8 billion. You wouldn't want to risk that if you were Mr. Cameron, would you?
Not in these days and age where the crisis is knocking on the door still.
International Herald Tribune, Cuba fights Australian tobacco labelling. This is on Cuban cigars sold in Australia. What's this about? Protecting the Cuban brand, or tell us more? Because the tobacco labelling in Australia is pretty hardcore, isn't it?
Yeah, Australia has really gone all out, so to speak. Their legislation on tobacco has really gone, and it will affect sales, there's no doubt about it. For Cuba, cigars is really the main business, so it's such an important part of their economy.
I think their sales in Australia are not that great compared to the sales elsewhere in the world. They sell a lot more in Spain and places like that apparently, but this is about the principle?
It's the principle, because if Australia is allowed to do it, the other countries in the West could very easily get the same idea, and that's what they're afraid of. So they're putting the foot down.
We've got to talk about bucket list. Now, I recently ran the marathon because I put that on my bucket list. So that's done. But I don't think it's actually nearly as a great a feat as some of the things on this list. Some are a bit odd. But we were going through this just before we came on air. And you've pretty much done most of these. There are 50. There are 50. You've done probably, 40 on here?
Yeah, I've probably done the 40 out of the 50 that I'd like to do, at least for now. There's certain things I might not agree with, but certainly I've been to more than 25 countries. I've been to 60 countries on Earth. Right. I've lived with the Indians in the Amazon. In 2008, I did the first tandem skydive about Mount Everest.
That's because one of the number 49 is try an adrenaline-packed activity such as skydiving. So that's been
you
gone.
can tick that one up, but they haven't got venture into space on this list.
No,
which I
think it's a bit of a lame list.
Aren't you?
Yeah, exactly right. I've got 3 trips lined up with 3 different rocket providers, including Virgin Galactic, EXCO, and Space Adventures. And I'm very excited, and things are actually making very good progress there.
So you need to write your own list, basically.
It also says drive a really fast car. Now, to you and me, I imagine, Sally, that means like a little sporty number.
No, Lamborghini, Ferrari, anything like that.
Right, no, that's nothing compared to what Pear's done.
Okay, what have you driven then?
I've driven a custom-built, faster than Formula 1 type of car, which is basically a converted aeroplane, where we put a new engine in the back and we sort of gave it.
What's your life insurance policy like? Are you uninsurable?
I think.
Probably uninsurable.
Expensive. It's always a delight having you with us and hearing of your upcoming adventures and past. Thanks very much. Sally and I will see you very soon. We're rather boring. We'll just sit here being boring.
See you later. Bye-bye.